What if I told you that one of the most normal daily habits women trust without question is silently starving their hair follicles right now? Not genetics, not aging, not bad luck. A routine so common, so socially accepted, that millions of women repeat it every single morning, believing they are improving their health, while beneath the surface, their biology is shifting into survival mode. And the most dangerous part? It often comes disguised as discipline. We live in a culture that glorifies restriction. Eat less, skip meals, cut carbs, slash calories, push harder, shrink faster. But your body is not a social media trend. It is a highly intelligent, metabolically active system designed to protect survival above all else. And when you chronically underfuel it, your body makes a decision. It chooses life over luxury, and biologically speaking, hair is considered a luxury. Every strand on your head grows from a follicle that behaves like a tiny organ. It has its own blood supply, its own growth cycle, its own energy demands. Hair follicles are among the fastest dividing cells in the body. That means they require a steady, reliable stream of nutrients, oxygen, amino acids, iron, zinc, B vitamins, essential fatty acids, and metabolic energy. When you consistently reduce calories, especially protein, your body cannot sustain that demand, so it adapts. The adaptation is subtle at first. Your metabolism slows slightly. Thyroid activity may begin to shift. Levels of leptin, a hormone that signals energy sufficiency, begin to drop. Cortisol, your stress hormone, may rise. The body interprets chronic calorie restriction as a potential famine. And in a famine, growth processes are dialed down. Hair growth is one of the first systems to be sacrificed. Under normal conditions, about 85 to 90% of your hair follicles are in the anagen phase, the active growth phase. The rest are cycling naturally, but when your body senses prolonged nutritional stress, it prematurely pushes more follicles into the telogen phase, the resting and shedding stage. 2 to 3 months later, you begin noticing excessive hair fall, clumps in the shower, more strands on your pillow, a widening part, thinner ponytail. You may assume it's seasonal, hormonal, genetic, but often it's delayed feedback from nutritional deprivation. Protein is not optional for hair. Hair is made primarily of keratin, a structural protein built from amino acids. If dietary protein is insufficient, your body prioritizes critical tissues, muscle, enzymes, immune cells, over hair production. Iron is essential for delivering oxygen to rapidly dividing follicle cells. Even mild iron deficiency, which is common in women, can impair growth. Zinc regulates cellular repair. Biotin and other B vitamins support energy metabolism inside the follicle. Essential fatty acids maintain scalp integrity and reduce inflammation. When restrictive dieting eliminates entire food groups or dramatically lowers total intake, these micronutrients quietly fall below optimal levels. Blood tests may still appear normal, but optimal hair growth requires more than just avoiding deficiency. It requires sufficiency. There's also the hormonal dimension. Chronic low-calorie intake can disrupt estrogen balance. In some women, menstrual cycles become irregular. When estrogen drops, hair can become more sensitive to androgens, hormones that can shrink follicles over time. The result is gradual miniaturization. Strands grow thinner, growth cycles shorten, density declines. And because the weight loss may feel rewarding at first, the connection to hair loss is often overlooked. The body can tolerate short-term deficits, but prolonged restriction, weeks turning into months, creates cumulative stress. Add intense exercise without adequate recovery, and the signal of scarcity becomes even stronger. This is not an argument against healthy body composition. It is an argument against extreme, prolonged deprivation. Sustainable nutrition fuels metabolism. It supports thyroid health. It stabilizes blood sugar. It protects hormonal balance. It maintains circulation to peripheral tissues like the scalp. When energy availability is consistent, follicles receive the message that conditions are safe for growth. Hair is incredibly responsive to internal conditions. When nourishment improves, when protein intake increases, when iron stores are replenished, when calories meet metabolic demand, follicles can re-enter the growth phase. Shedding decreases, thickness gradually improves, but recovery takes time because the hair cycle operates in months, not days. The powerful truth is that rapid thinning is often not random. It is feedback. It is biology communicating that the internal environment has shifted into conservation mode. And when you shift that environment back toward nourishment, safety, and metabolic stability, you give your hair follicles the resources they were designed to use. Now let's confront another habit that feels completely harmless because it's wrapped in beauty, confidence, and self-expression, yet it may be quietly accelerating hair thinning at a structural level. High heat styling, frequent chemical treatments, tight, tension-heavy hairstyles. These practices are normalized, celebrated, and often expected. But beneath the polished surface, repeated mechanical and thermal stress can compromise the very architecture of your hair. To understand the damage, you first have to understand structure. Each strand of hair is made of three layers. The outermost layer, the cuticle, is composed of overlapping protective scales. Think of it like shingles on a roof. When those shingles lie flat, the strand reflects light, retains moisture, and resists breakage. Beneath the cuticle sits the cortex, which gives hair its strength, elasticity, and color. This inner core is rich in keratin protein and structural bonds that maintain integrity. High heat, especially temperatures above 300 degrees Celsius, causes those protective cuticle scales to lift. Repeated exposure cracks them. Moisture trapped inside the strand evaporates rapidly. The internal protein bonds begin to weaken. Over time, microfractures form along the shaft. You may not notice it immediately, but eventually, the strand becomes brittle. It snaps easily. Split ends travel upward. What appears to be shedding is often breakage occurring at different lengths. Flat irons, curling wands, and blow dryers are not inherently destructive. The issue is frequency, intensity, and lack of protection. When heat is applied daily without protective barriers, the cumulative stress becomes significant. Hair does not regenerate along the shaft once damaged. Unlike skin, it cannot repair itself. Once structural proteins are compromised, the only solution is trimming away the damage. Chemical processing amplifies the stress. Bleaching agents penetrate deep into the cortex to strip pigment molecules. In doing so, they disrupt disulfide bonds, the structural links that hold keratin fibers together. Relaxers and perm solutions intentionally break and reform these bonds to change texture. Even frequent coloring alters the hair's protein environment. Each session slightly weakens the strand. Over time, resilience declines. The scalp does not escape this assault. Chemical irritation can inflame the skin. Inflammation is not just redness or itching, it is a biological response that releases signaling molecules capable of altering follicle behavior. Chronic low-grade inflammation can constrict microblood vessels that supply oxygen and nutrients to the follicle. When circulation is compromised, growth slows. Then there is traction. Tight ponytails, braids, buns, extensions, and weaves create constant pulling force at the root. Hair follicles are anchored into the scalp, but they are not indestructible. Continuous tension triggers inflammation around the follicle base. Initially, you may notice tenderness along the hairline, then small broken hairs. Over time, follicles can become permanently damaged, a condition known as traction alopecia. The tragedy is that traction-related thinning often develops gradually. Because it is slow, it feels invisible. A slightly higher hairline, slight thinning at the temples. It's easy to dismiss until density noticeably declines. And once a follicle has been scarred by prolonged tension, regrowth becomes difficult. Even seemingly minor habits contribute to cumulative stress. Aggressive brushing when wet, towel drying with friction, sleeping with tight hairstyles, using elastics that pull excessively. Each action adds mechanical strain. Individually, they may seem insignificant. Collectively, they weaken structural integrity. Hair is strongest when it retains moisture and protein balance. Heat strips moisture. Chemicals disrupt protein bonds. Tension destabilizes the root. When all three occur simultaneously, heat styling on chemically processed hair pulled tightly into high-tension styles, the risk of accelerated thinning increases dramatically. Protection does not require abandoning beauty routines. It requires strategy, lower heat settings, limiting heat to a few times per week instead of daily, applying thermal protectants that create a barrier and reduce protein loss, allowing hair to air dry periodically, spacing chemical treatments further apart, deep conditioning to restore moisture balance, choosing looser hairstyles that reduce tension on the follicle. The scalp itself deserves care. gentle cleansing to remove buildup without stripping natural oils, scalp massage to promote circulation, periods of rest between protective styles, awareness of early warning signs like tenderness, breakage near the hairline, or increased shedding after chemical exposure. Hair is biologically resilient when treated with respect, but it is not immune to chronic assault. Structural damage masquerades as hair loss. Breakage reduces perceived density. Inflammation alters the growth environment. Tension weakens the anchor point. When these stressors are reduced, follicles regain stability, strands retain length, thickness appears fuller, not because of magic products, but because the biology of preservation replaces the cycle of repeated damage. Now we have to address the invisible force that silently amplifies hair loss, even when nutrition seems adequate and styling habits seem controlled. Chronic psychological stress. It does not show up on a nutrition label. It does not sit on your bathroom counter. But biologically, it can be one of the most powerful accelerators of rapid shedding in women. Your body is wired for survival. When you experience stress, whether emotional, financial, relational, or physical, your brain activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This triggers the release of cortisol and adrenaline. In short bursts, this system protects you. It sharpens awareness. It mobilizes energy. It prepares you to respond. But when stress becomes chronic, when cortisol remains elevated for weeks or months, the internal environment shifts from balanced to defensive. Hair follicles are extremely sensitive to this shift. Under healthy conditions, most follicles remain in the anagen phase, actively growing for 2 to 7 years. Growth requires energy, oxygen, stable hormones, and low inflammatory signaling. Chronic stress disrupts each of these pillars. Elevated cortisol alters blood sugar regulation, increases systemic inflammation, and interferes with hormone balance. It sends a message throughout the body that conditions are unstable. When the body senses instability, it conserves resources. One way it does this is by prematurely shifting hair follicles out of the growth phase and into the telogen phase. This process is known as telogen effluvium. The key detail that confuses many women is the delay. The shedding does not happen immediately after the stressful event. It typically occurs 2 to 3 months later. By that time, the connection between stress and hair loss is rarely recognized. You might notice more hair collecting in the shower drain, increased strands on your pillow, thinner volume when you tie your hair back. Because the shift happens internally first, the visible shedding feels sudden, even though the biological trigger occurred weeks earlier. Cortisol also affects circulation. Chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, causes blood vessels to constrict. When microcirculation in the scalp decreases, follicles receive less oxygen and fewer nutrients. Hair growth is a metabolically expensive process. Without adequate blood flow, growth slows. Stress further disrupts hormonal balance. In women, prolonged cortisol elevation can interfere with estrogen and progesterone levels. Hormonal imbalance may increase sensitivity to androgens, which can contribute to follicle miniaturization in genetically susceptible individuals. Over time, strands may grow back thinner after each shedding cycle. Inflammation is another hidden pathway. Chronic psychological stress elevates inflammatory cytokines in the body. These signaling molecules can interfere directly with follicle cycling. Inflammation around the follicle can shorten the growth phase and extend the resting phase. It can also weaken the structural environment supporting the hair root. Sleep disruption compounds the damage. Stress often reduces sleep quality and duration. Deep sleep is when growth hormone is released, tissue repair accelerates, and inflammatory markers decline. When sleep is shortened or fragmented, recovery is incomplete. Hair follicles, being among the fastest dividing cells in the body, suffer when restorative cycles are compromised. Add modern lifestyle pressures, constant digital stimulation, financial anxiety, work demands, caregiving responsibilities, and you create a sustained stress load that the body interprets as ongoing threat. Even if you are eating well and using gentle hair care products, chronic stress alone can push follicles toward shedding. There is also the behavioral component. When stressed, people may eat irregularly, crave high-sugar foods, skip protein, overexercise, or neglect self-care. These secondary effects amplify the biological stress response. Blood sugar spikes raise insulin. Insulin fluctuations can influence androgen pathways. Nutritional gaps widen. Recovery becomes harder. The empowering truth is that hair follicles are responsive to safety signals. When stress decreases, when the nervous system shifts from sympathetic dominance into parasympathetic balance, blood flow improves, cortisol levels stabilize, inflammatory markers decline, follicles can gradually re-enter the growth phase. Stress management is not a luxury practice, it is a biological intervention. Slow breathing techniques stimulate the vagus nerve, lowering heart rate and cortisol. Resistance training improves insulin sensitivity and boosts circulation without excessively raising stress hormones when properly balanced. Sunlight exposure supports circadian rhythm alignment, improving sleep quality. Consistent meal timing stabilizes blood sugar, reducing metabolic stress. Even small changes, 10 minutes of daily mindfulness, regular sleep schedules, moderate physical activity instead of extreme overtraining, send powerful biochemical signals that conditions are safe. Safety allows growth. Instability triggers conservation. Hair loss driven by stress is often reversible, but patience is required. Because the hair cycle spans months, visible improvement may lag behind internal recovery. Reduced shedding may be the first sign. Gradual thickening follows as new anagen hairs emerge. Your scalp is not separate from your emotional life. Every thought pattern, every chronic worry, every prolonged period of tension has biochemical consequences. The follicles are listening to those signals. When stress becomes the norm, shedding becomes more likely. When balance returns, growth becomes possible again. There is one more everyday habit that often goes unnoticed because it is woven into modern convenience, social gatherings, quick breakfasts, afternoon pick-me-ups, and late-night comfort. Repeated blood sugar spikes driven by ultra-processed carbohydrates and sugary drinks. It feels harmless. It feels normal. But metabolically, it can quietly disrupt the hormonal and inflammatory balance that healthy hair follicles depend on. Every time you consume refined sugar or rapidly absorbed carbohydrates, white bread, pastries, sweetened beverages, candy, highly processed snacks, your blood glucose rises quickly. In response, your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin's job is to escort glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells. In the short term, this system works beautifully, but when spikes happen multiple times per day, every day, the system begins to strain. Chronically elevated insulin levels can lead to insulin resistance. This means your cells stop responding efficiently to insulin signal, forcing your body to produce even more. Elevated insulin doesn't just affect blood sugar, it also influences hormonal pathways. In women, higher insulin levels can increase ovarian androgen production and reduce levels of sex hormone-binding globulin. The result is more circulating active androgens. Why does this matter for hair? Hair follicles, especially in genetically susceptible women, can be sensitive to androgens. Elevated androgen activity may gradually shrink follicles in a process called miniaturization. Each growth cycle produces a thinner strand than the one before. The anagen phase shortens. Density slowly declines. What looks like sudden thinning is often the visible result of years of subtle hormonal influence. Insulin resistance also promotes inflammation. High blood glucose increases the production of advanced glycation end products, molecules formed when sugar binds to proteins. These compounds increase oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling. Inflammation affects the tiny blood vessels that nourish the scalp. Microvascular damage reduces efficient delivery of oxygen and nutrients to follicles. Remember, the hair follicle is a metabolically demanding structure. It requires consistent energy. When blood sugar swings dramatically, spiking high and then crashing low, the follicle experiences instability. Energy supply becomes erratic. Cortisol may rise in response to low blood sugar crashes, further compounding stress signals. There is also the thyroid connection. Blood sugar imbalance can influence thyroid hormone conversion. The thyroid plays a central role in regulating metabolic rate, including the activity of rapidly dividing cells like those in the hair matrix. Subtle thyroid inefficiency, even within normal lab ranges, can contribute to thinning when combined with insulin resistance and inflammation. And then there is the scalp environment itself. High sugar intake may alter the microbiome balance of the skin. Increased inflammation and sebum changes can create conditions that irritate follicles. While this effect is less dramatic than hormonal shifts, it contributes to cumulative stress on the growth environment. The problem is not occasional dessert. It is chronic, repeated metabolic spikes without balance. A sweet coffee in the morning, refined cereal for breakfast, a sugary snack mid-morning, white rice or refined flour at lunch, a soda in the afternoon, dessert after dinner. Individually, each event feels insignificant. Collectively, they keep insulin elevated for much of the day. Stabilizing blood sugar is one of the most powerful internal strategies for protecting hair density. When meals contain adequate protein, fiber, and healthy fats, glucose absorption slows. Insulin rises gently rather than sharply. Energy remains steady. Cortisol stays more balanced. Hormonal fluctuations become less extreme. Protein is especially important. It not only provides amino acids for keratin production, but also moderates blood sugar response when eaten alongside carbohydrates. Fiber from vegetables, legumes, and whole foods slows digestion. Healthy fats improve satiety and reduce rapid glucose spikes. Even simple behavioral changes, walking for 10 minutes after meals, can improve glucose regulation and enhance insulin sensitivity. Resistance training increases muscle mass, which improves glucose uptake. Muscles act like reservoirs for blood sugar, reducing the burden on insulin. Adequate sleep enhances insulin sensitivity. Chronic sleep deprivation, on the other hand, worsens glucose control and increases cravings for refined carbohydrates. When insulin levels stabilize, androgen activity often moderates. Inflammatory markers decline. Microcirculation improves. The scalp receives more consistent nourishment. Over time, follicles that were shrinking may regain strength if damage has not progressed too far. Hair is a visible reflection of internal metabolic rhythm. It thrives in stability. It struggles in chaos. Repeated blood sugar spikes create biochemical turbulence, hormonal shifts, oxidative stress, vascular strain. When that turbulence becomes chronic, the follicles adapt by slowing growth and producing thinner strands. The encouraging reality is that metabolic health is highly responsive to daily choices. Balanced meals, regular movement, restorative sleep, and reduced reliance on ultra-processed sugars can shift the internal environment within weeks. Follicles respond more slowly because their growth cycle spans months, but the biological foundation for recovery begins with each stabilized meal. Thinning hair is rarely caused by one single dramatic event. More often, it is the cumulative result of subtle, repeated signals that tell the body conditions are unstable. When blood sugar swings are replaced with metabolic steadiness, you replace those signals of stress with signals of balance, nourishment, and internal safety that support stronger, healthier hair growth over time.